Right now, it's just going through going live, redirecting. All right. Welcome, welcome. I'm just going to let the live, we are here. We are here. So just going to get started. I want people to get comfortable, come in the room, grab a drink, grab your notes, do whatever you need to do so you can get comfortable tonight and join us for our webinar, and we'll get started in a few seconds. All right. Welcome, welcome everyone to the webinar tonight. I am so excited to have you here for this conversation, Love and Logic and How Prenups Build Stronger Marriages. This presentation tonight is going to be a conversation, and I know sometimes when we talk about prenuptials, things can get a little bit uncomfortable. In fact, prenups often have a bad reputation. But tonight we're going to clear up some misconceptions. We're going to break down their real purpose and show how they can actually make your marriage stronger. Go figure. We'll talk about what a prenup is, how it can help both parties, and how to even start that conversation, because that's probably sometimes that's the hardest part for people. So you and your fiance can get started on the right track. We'll also make sure you understand the things that should go into a prenup to make sure that thing is valid and enforceable. So let's start with a little bit about me. So, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Attorney Sharice Williams, and I am a family law attorney in Maryland and Washington, D.C. I am the attorney for the law office of Sharice L. Williams. And at our office, we help people navigate custody, divorce, prenuptials, postnuptials, child support, and we offer a conflict resolution process called collaborative divorce sometimes, but technically it's a practice area. Now, I have spent years working with high achieving professionals, business owners, and parents who want to protect their futures while also making sure they make the best decisions for themselves. So, with my extensive litigation experience, I also believe, and I know after just experiencing all the things that I've experienced and the type of cases, that it is important that conflict resolution and strategic planning, how looking at those things can help you save time, stress, and money. So, whether you're engaged, whether you're married already, or just thinking ahead, this webinar will give you some valuable tips of how prenups work and how they can benefit you and your partner. So, before I delve into all of that fun stuff, let's have a few housekeeping tips. Now, this is part of my webinar series, and I want people to understand that I want some interaction and communication. So that you do have the chat. So I encourage you you can make a comment about something I said or put your questions in the chat. Some people have already submitted questions in advance, and that's great. So we'll have those to look at later. And we'll save a 10-minute period near the end of this presentation so that we can go over some of those questions and answers. So definitely, even if you ask your questions, I'll try to hold them all to the end so I can just utilize that time. And remember, we are recording this. So this presentation will be available on my YouTube channel, social medias, and I'll be able to give that information at the end of this presentation. So just know that this webinar is for educational purposes only. It's not legal advice, and it doesn't create an attorney-client relationship. If you want some more specific one-on-one, because every situation is unique, I'll provide my information so you can give us a call, and then we can set up something for you that'll be way more personal. Okay. And as I said, if you're have enough stamina and you're nice enough to stay to the end, then I'll even provide you with a prenuptial agreement essential guide, which will break down some key considerations when you create that prenup. So next, we're going to get into this. We're going to talk about what a prenup is and some common myths. So let's start with what a prenup is. It is a legally binding contract between two people who, before they get married, and it outlines assets, it outlines debts. You can add stuff about your finances, how those things will be handled during the marriage. And of course, in the event of a divorce, you already have a plan for how you want to handle those things. Now, this is one of the main reasons why I want to do this webinar, because a lot of people, when you talk about prenups, there's this common myth and misunderstanding that you don't trust your partner if you ask for a prenup. Now, one thing I know, and even on my way in today, I overheard a YouTuber who was talking about his marriage, he's been married for a very long time, and his idea was that if he had to even think about a prenup, then he wouldn't even want to be with his partner. And so it was this idea that there wouldn't have been trust in that person if they even had to have that thought process. Now, let's look at this a little differently. When you're thinking about a prenup will allow you to have transparency in conversations about money and other hard things that you're going to have to deal with in your marriage. You're two adults. People are. It's almost like having a business. So you have to think about it because it is part business when you're thinking about assets and money and debt. So having the hard conversations, opening up and talking about your fears and things that your boundaries that you'll tolerate and not tolerate, it actually can build trust. So I believe that's a myth that if you bring this up or if this idea is presented, that it should have a negative connotation. It actually should have a positive thought that you're handling it in a mature way and you're setting your boundaries up front. Myth number 2: a prenup is just another way to plan for that divorce. Now, in one way, it's a plan, but it's almost like when you do a business and you come up with a business plan, right? You can't even get funding for a business if you don't have a plan. When you're looking at your marriage and someone that you're likely to stay with until one or both of you leaves this earth, then yes, you want to think about the now, the and the future. And so having that ability to plan for it and lay out your how you want to handle money, bills, if someone loses their job, there's nothing wrong with that. People are effective and do better when they have a plan. So instead of when life and unexpected things happen and you don't know how to handle it, you're thinking about that in advance. So it's like having an insurance policy. Just like you have to do those things to drive your car and other things that have a benefit, and then you know that something bad can happen as well. That's the whole point. Same with your health. So think about prenups in that way instead of a negative way. It's about protection and clarity, not just planning for failure. Another common myth is that it's not going to be binding, but it is. Again, we talked about the fact that it's a contract and it's a meeting of the minds of two parties. And so both parties should be protected and thought of and have something that they've contributed to this prenup. So let's talk about that. Another myth: if you don't have a prenup, everything automatically gets split in a divorce. So 50-50. So with the prenup, the state gets to decide how everything is divided. Now, as I said before, I am a Maryland and DC barred attorney. So I know people often hear about California and community property, but here we are an equitable distribution state, which means things get divided equitably, not necessarily even. So 50-50 is not always the goal, but it is to allow people to get divorced, and then the state will implement whatever their system is, which is hopefully to not leave somebody destitute. And so that is the standard. So if you don't have a prenup and there are things that happen in your marriage and you commingled property and money and you had accounts, doesn't really matter whose name's on stuff. And so that's one of the first things when I represent people, I let them know it's in my name because people are quick to say that. But that alone is not the standard. So just keep that in mind. And having a prenup, you will have that conversation. So it's important and you'll get to understand how to develop it so that you can actually say it's mine, it's in my name, so I don't have to worry about it being considered. So prenups are not about taking away your rights, they're not about predicting failure, they're about creating a clear and mutually beneficial financial agreement. And now we'll discuss what a prenup can and cannot do. So when we look at what a prenup can and cannot do, let's look at what I just kind of mentioned. Let's define separate, or what people often mention as premarital and marital property. So that's one of the biggest benefits of a prenup. You get to make your definition of what's premarital and marital property. And so this is can be a very important factor because again, you're not going to always know in the beginning when you're dating what you're actually going to gain in your marriage, right? So you can define what you want to put as separate and or marital property. So if you want to say the things that are in my name are going to be my property, then that'll be exactly what it means when it comes time to divorce. Where I previously just said that's not necessarily the definition if there's no prenuptial. So this is an important factor that people don't understand. You can now actually define present and future. So things you have before the marriage, and then the things that you'll accumulate during the marriage, even if they don't exist, even if you don't even know. So it could be real property, bank accounts, things that you may think that you're going to accumulate, and then you can always add stuff. So that's a good way to look at it. You protect things that you don't even know you're going to have. Like, how good is that? Next, you can protect your business investments and real estate. So, like myself, I'm a small business owner. I'm sure there's a lot of business owners out there. So, you think about what you've accomplished before you get married. You may have a profitable running business. So, when you get married, the income, the profit, your name, all of that could potentially at some point be subject to division in a divorce. So, looking at trying to protect the name of your business, the interest you built, whatever it is, you can put clauses in a prenuptial to have those protections. If you have investments that are dear and near and dear to you that you built up ahead of time and you want to protect them, they can also be put in the prenup. Real estate that you purchase as a single person that you want to, especially if you have kids that you've had prior to getting married that are not the children of your spouse. This is a key one. You can prevent the spouse, because in a situation where you pass away, not necessarily divorce, because this is when your kids may not be protected, you can have your kids have what would have been yours. So that is a key thing that where if you don't have a will, it may automatically go to your spouse. So think about that if you're a parent. That's an important thing for you to think about. And also, with the real estate that you accumulate in the future, you may want to have something that's yours. So that's a thing that a prenup can do. Another big one is it can outline spousal support and have an agreement and spousal support, or another word is alimony, monetary awards. So if you think you're gonna go into your marriage and decide to be a stay-at-home spouse or whatever, you can decide whether you want to put waive alimony altogether or have set parameters around alimony. Or so that's subject to you. So you don't have to hear about stories online where these large alimony payments and you're like, whoa. So that's a good benefit. Shield, it also can shield one spouse from premarital debt. So yes, we live in an area, and not just this area, but just knowing that there's a lot of people who go to school, they may have student loan debt. People often have credit card debt that you accumulate. You may have filed for bankruptcy. So having a prenup will allow you to put protections, or you may be the one with it. So you may put some clause in there that your spouse will not be responsible for your debt. even if they choose to help you voluntarily, you can make it so that they're not responsible in the event you get a divorce, because things often get commingled. So this is makes it less messy and more clear cut in the event that your marriage does not survive. Okay, so let's now talk about what a prenup cannot do. So the prenup cannot decide child custody or child support, because those things are dictated by the best interest standard, and it's super important that the courts keep control of that. So we don't generally put custody provisions, especially if kids are not born yet. So just know that. You don't want to create a one-sided or unfair terms. So one person can't say, I get everything. Even if the person is unfaithful or does something, you still have to have a financial equitable, agreement where people are living and they can move on and live, without then becoming a burden to the state. And also, last but not least, you don't want to override your state laws. So you have to make sure that whatever contract you enter is in line with the laws of the state that you're in. So next, we're going to talk about what how to bring up that prenup and that conversation that we talked about with your spouse. And this is one of the areas that I think is super important, because with anything, when you're dating, you should start early. Just kind of see the point of view that the person has, because wouldn't it be something where you get so far along in your relationship and this person is just completely against a prenup? And this is something that you've always said you wanted, right? So you want to make sure you have conversations as early as possible, even if it's not saying directly to them, because you may not know if you're going to marry this person when you first start dating, but just kind of see their philosophy on these topics so that you have an idea of how to approach it. And then have a positive, direct conversation, because again, it's like a business and you're planning it so that you're smart, you're intelligent, and both parties have a say. So it should be a two-way conversation. And so if you put it in a way that the person feels heard, and this is not just me trying to stick you with a piece of paper that's going to benefit just me, because that's the bad connotation that prenups often get. And also consider talking to an attorney together. And if you do that, just know that an attorney can only represent one person. So that person can draft it, but you're still going to be in a position where you may need legal representation if you're not the one, getting the attorney. So think about making sure that you have someone to go over terms and advocate for you, so that there's no misunderstandings. I've had people come to me who said they signed something, but they really didn't understand it. And when you sign a contract, you should understand it. So that's super important that you still have your say and have some legal backing. So I'm more than happy to look at drafts that another attorney wrote up, and I'm happy to be the one that drafts something. So again, it's just important, but I only can represent one party. And I can't give legal advice to both. I can just speak on what you want to include in it. So keep that in mind. Now, a prenuptial agreement, and it's like I said, it's a smart financial discussion, decision, and it's not a personal attack. So just make sure those type of conversations are had with your partner. And again, I think if we look at this similar to how when you start a business, you're excited about, your business plan, and you forecast what your profits, and it's just one of those things that is common and everyone gets. You can look at it that way, and you don't have to be super wealthy, to get a prenup. So just keep that in mind as well, because people often use that as a reason. So that could have been one of my myths, that I could have added to that section. So now that we've talked about how to have the conversation, let's talk about how to make sure that this thing is enforceable now that you go through all of this. Okay? I think that's super important. So to make your prenuptial agreement enforceable, you want to make sure that you have full financial disclosure, right? You want to make sure that both parties are completely transparent about their assets and debts. Now, the thing about that, when you have full financial disclosure, is that you want to actually make a list of your assets, your debt. So this is where I said you can learn a lot about your partner, because oftentimes people are not fully transparent. And I do divorces all day. There's people that don't know, have any idea what their partner makes. They've never seen their statement. They don't know what bank accounts, what credit cards. They just kind of live separate lives under the same roof. And this is not a judgmental conversation. This is just letting you know that it often hurts them in the divorce because they don't know what to ask for if somebody's hiding something, because they never actually had the conversations. So if you do upfront and you have disclosure, hopefully you'll keep those same practices throughout the marriage. And often it's good to have a financial discussion. If it's not once a year, twice a year, some people put that in their prenup, that they will sit down and go over financials. So if your parent, if your spouse bought a property. I've had people buy properties, their spouse has no idea, open up accounts, they have no idea. So full financial disclosure from the beginning, and let that be one of your boundaries. No pressure or coercion. So one of the things when a prenup is attacked is they're going to ask you, is it voluntary? Was there any undue burden? So if you're looking at coming to a lawyer or slipping a prenuptial agreement under the door of your fiance right before you guys are about to get married or the night before, don't do that. Please don't do that. And the reason why I say that is because the person is happy, they're nervous, they can't really think straight, and you're now putting a contract agreement, which could be considered under duress. And if someone were to call me, usually I won't take a case. If someone called my office and they were getting married in less than 2 months, I generally don't take those cases because I still think that's even too close. So obviously, everyone has their situation and there are exceptions to the rule, but it's just a general practice that you should at least be 4 months or more that you should have been working on this prenuptial agreement before you have a wedding date. So, yes, you don't want to have the person feel like they're not getting opportunity to have legal representation or understand the terms. So keep it in a situation where it's far enough out. The terms need to be fair and reasonable. Like we already said, no one-sided winner takes all situation. And if it is, you might have a situation where your prenup is thrown out. You don't want that. And last but not least, we already discussed this, is that each person should have the benefit of independent counsel. So, with that being said, you will be in a much, much better position to be able to have your prenuptial agreement enforced if, in fact, there's something that goes down and someone tries to challenge it because they had a change of heart or something like that. Okay. So, these are all the tips that I would give in those situations. So, now that we have gone over a lot of the things that would make up a good prenuptial agreement, the next thing that we're going to cover in this last 10 minutes are some of the questions that people often have when they're doing a prenuptial agreement. Okay. And it looks like there were some questions that were brought um, previously submitted. So I can start with those questions. Thank you for anyone that submitted those. So one of the questions is, what if my fiance doesn't want to sign my prenuptial agreement? What do I do? So yes, this is a good question. If you have a fiance who doesn't want to sign the prenuptial agreement, you could try, if you're far enough out, and this is why I said it's always important to do that, then you could always continue to have those conversations. And you could also take a term out, right? If there's just one thing that is keeping this person from your fiance from signing, or signing this agreement, you could always decide that that's not worth it to put in the agreement, and you still have time to modify it so that the person will sign it. So that's one way. But ultimately, if they won't sign it, then it's not a contract. Because again, you have to have two parties with a mutual benefit, and it needs to be signed by both parties. So if you don't have it, you don't have a contract, you don't have a prenup. So you might want to think about the fact that, whether you want to go through with the marriage or not. So that's totally up to you. I don't have any particular advice on that. Um, Next, if I have inheritance and I don't have a prenup, will my prenup be subject to, will my property be subject to division in a divorce? This is a good question and it has more than one answer. Generally speaking, inherited property is not included in a divorce, is not considered marital property, but this is where how you handle your inheritance comes into play. I've had cases and I'm working on cases where people have what I consider commingled their inheritance. They deposit whatever money into a joint account. They use marital assets to upgrade the property. They put their work money and their inheritance all together, and then at that point we don't know where the money was derived for to upkeep this property. So it can be commingled to the point where the court can't trace it to just being inheritance. So it is a tricky thing, and you need to be very careful about how you handle inheritance. Now, if inheritance is put into the agreement and is stated that any profits, proceeds, any money spent on this inherited, let's just say real estate to make it simplified, it still remain in separate property in the event of a divorce, then you're protected completely. It doesn't matter how you went about it. So I strongly would recommend any client that came into my office, if they have inherited property that they don't want to become marital property, to have a prenup so that there's no commingling argument that can be had. So that's a good question, and it is one that often is, without a prenup, people mishandle their inheritance. Not intentionally, but it's just they don't understand any better. Um, Someone wants to know, are they able to modify a prenup? So that's a good question. And the answer is yes. Because if you have a prenuptial, sometime you'll have a clause in there that says it can be modified in writing, and you can write it, but it also can be modified by doing a postnuptial. So and that goes to the question that was posed about what is the difference between a prenuptial and a postnuptial, right? So looking at a prenuptial, we're looking at something that is done before marriage. So pre and nuptial is marriage, and then you have the postnuptial. So as a married couple, you can do a postnuptial. And I often have people come in, they're married, their marriage may have some things that happen, or there's some life-changing event. And in order to protect themselves, they want to have a postnuptial. Sometimes it's an infidelity and they want to put an infidelity clause. So if there's another cheating, or you can do this before you get married and put in the prenup, but it happens also in postnups, so that you or get paid a certain amount of money or whatever it may be, so that it gives people pause before they're gonna step out. So the postnup is post marriage. So that is a key difference. And it can definitely be done, but you can modify your agreement that way. So yes, as long as, again, you have a meeting of the mind and both parties agree to it. If you don't have that, then you won't be able to have this postnuptial. So just keep that in mind. Let's see, what else? Any other questions? And someone wants to know, can it become invalid over time? Now, if the laws change in your state and your prenup, and this doesn't happen very often, but I'll just put it out there, and your prenuptial agreement now violates the law, there is an argument that there is a possibility that that clause could become invalid. Doesn't mean the whole prenuptial will become invalid. I've rarely had that happen in a case, so it's a very small chance. Now, there are clauses that can become invalid, so that's something that can happen. So, but it's not a big thing that a large majority of people would have to worry about, right? Because most people are not writing clauses that are going to change majority of the time in the time that they're married. So I think, those were most of the questions that I saw. And so, like I said, I appreciate all of the people that take the time out to submit questions, that come and watch. And again, as you can see on my page, there's my social media handles, and on YouTube specifically, I will be posting this video so that you can people who came in late or people who want to watch it in the future are able to go there. So 50 Shades of Law, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, as well as YouTube. And then again, my phone number is there. If you want to call our office, we're more than happy to listen to you, make sure and see if you're eligible for the services we provide. And I certainly am willing to have you join our Williams Law Firm family. With us, you're not another case number. And so, for all those brave souls who were able to stick with us throughout this whole webinar, I really, really appreciate your participation, your staying with us. And like I said, you can send me a message on Facebook Messenger with your email address and your name and then I can send you this guide. I had a guide and I did not say it in the beginning, so I did have a guide that I'm be distributing about prenuptial agreements. So this is something that you can keep, and it has some of the tips that I said today. So you'll have one that you can refer back to. I love to give information and tips, and this is one more webinar series in a series that we've been doing for 2025, and we'll be doing another one in April. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to seeing you in a future webinar and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening. Bye-bye.